1950, a couple guys left the Arthur D. Little Company and started a company, Synectics Inc. It continues today, and it's flourished. There's 8 to 10 offices and licensees all over the world. I thought maybe we'd start this morning by getting some insight on just how it started, how it grew, and what's behind the success.
I really want to start out with saying, in a word, terror. We were a group of 8 people at Arthur D. Little, which is a big consulting firm, mostly industrial research at that time. And we were called the Invention Design Group. This was actually in 1955, 6, and 7, and 8, and 9. We left them in 1960. We started to wonder why sometimes we did pretty well and sometimes we didn't. And we had an old wire recorder with us in our lab that had been given to us to fix. And so we began just sort of testing it to listen to ourselves as we talked about our problems. And we discovered that it was quite different. What was actually going on was different from what we thought was going on. And so we really began to pay attention, and we were spending quite a lot of time at that. And our management found out that we weren't doing much work. We were working a little bit and then listening a lot. And they gave us an ultimatum, and they were a very kind bunch of people, I've got to say that. But we chose to leave, and that was in 1960. And I want to tell you, it was high level of fear. We were going into the invention business. We were going to invent products using this edge we had in knowing what the creative process was, we thought, to invent whatever anybody might want and things that they didn't know they wanted.
I don't need that. George, what was your input? What was the driving force for you to get involved with all this? Oh, you can't hear this? Okay, hold. It won't pin. Can you just hold it closer?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. I'll ask again. George, what is behind, what did you contribute? What do you feel proudest of in the Synectics?
Maybe I should give you a word or two about how I happened to join that group. I was in the advertising business in Rochester, New York, in a very successful company doing very well, but I got incredibly bored with what I was doing. And I left to join a friend of mine who I'd met recently named Bill Gordon, he was the head of that. And I was hired by his group to help them get more commercial. We had separate quarters. We were away from Acorn Park, which was very we thought, an uptight kind of place. This was a very untied kind of place. And I was so seduced by it that instead of helping get them sort of straightened out, I joined the circus. I really don't know exactly what was I guess it was just I wanted to be alive, and that was a very lively way to go at it.
When we talked over the phone, you talked about 3 reasons you felt that it was very successful. And one of them was just a lot of hard work. You also mentioned research, and that has been important to you throughout the years, and you've continued that. How is the research continuing now?
This listening to ourselves changed into watching ourselves videotape, and everything keeps changing. When we started, we were going to invent and use this creative process to get rich and famous. It didn't work out quite that way. didn't work out that way. As we got more and more into this, my view of what we were doing changed, and it keeps changing. And the latest version is that people, we think, are trained to fight themselves, and this produces disorder and entropy in a person. And it's our aim now to figure out how we can help people change that to synergy. And it ain't easy, because people don't cooperate very well. It's surprising.
What are some of the things that you're doing with this?
We have, well, I should give you a little more background.
Okay.
How am I doing on time? In 1987, I was single at the moment, and I met this amazing woman, and she was...
Who just happens to be here today. Could we ask her to stand up? Kathleen?
And she was resisting me, and so I retired so I could spend full time chasing her. And as we talked about the things that interested us, she's a marital therapist. And the troubles that couples have are very like the kinds of troubles that we saw people having in groups who were wanting to invent and think better. And we said, what if we didn't have to sell this, didn't have to be commercial? What would we do to make this help people the most? And that's what we've been working on. And it's totally impractical, and yet, it has some promise. It's called the Mind Free program. I also, just one or two, it's a program for revisiting self-limiting decisions that you made early on.
How are you meeting the resistance? What are you doing to overcome that? It's easy to teach process, as you told me before. Once we go inside, and you've just mentioned again, we receive a lot of resistance. What are you doing about that?
We're not trying to overcome it. The way this works is that a group gets to know each other in a special way, a way that we call practical intimacy. And then we share experiences focused on one thing after another that we know is critical. And nobody teaches anything. Kathleen and I are player coaches, but mostly just players. And we share experiences. And if you hear something in my experience that's useful to you, you take it, and vice versa. So it's a self-motivated, self-operating thing.
Do you weave it back into Synectics at all?
We use the Synectics process to work on problems. It's a good thinking process, just the way brainstorming is. And we don't run sessions in the usual sense. We sit around, we use those processes to work on whatever problems one individual has, and then another.
When you haven't been at work, what have you been doing?
Well, I have a word for it. It's called fecklessing around.
That must be hard to translate.
Well, you know the word feckless, sort of irresponsible, do no good.
Okay.
Well, that's what I do when I'm not working. What feckless is? You might understand that. It's hacking around, not doing anything productive. So part of the time I'm working on that. And I've come close to perfecting that, I might add. I also do all the house. No, I don't do the cleaning, but I do the cooking and all that kind of thing, because Kathleen has to work.
So all this fecklessing around, does that ultimately come into some of this coming back to the person? Did that somewhat affect that direction that you moved? Because when you're fecklessing around, I imagine that you're really just dealing with yourself.
That's a very good insight. Yes, I can't keep my mind off this, to tell you the truth. It just has obsessed me, not just the last 10 years, but almost from the time I began to realize we weren't really in the invention business at all. That we were in the business of working with people and learning about myself. And that's an obsession.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the invention business, are all of you familiar with the NIH factor? Okay. Tell us what NIH means. Now we're moving into Synectics again.
This was maybe the most important lesson of my life. When we left ADL, we didn't have much trouble persuading people to hire us. We told people we would invent for them what they wanted, and we would get hired, and then we would invent it. We did all of this ourselves. We built models, and that's what we delivered, not reports. We would deliver a model, and they usually didn't work, but they showed that maybe if somebody really worked on them, they would work. And the executive who hired us would say, "That's great, just what we want." And then he would call his engineers and scientists, the people who are going to have to really make it work, and they just weren't interested. So that the things that we would do would just die after they got into the client's house. And what was going on, we discovered, was the NIH factor, which stands for Not Invented Here. And this is a powerful, seems to be universal. And fortunately, before we went out of business, we admitted that this was happening, so we stopped trying to do it and said, you bring your guys and girls, women, and we will run the sessions and you do your own inventing. And that was very successful. And that has been a sort of a key thing for me to understand that if it isn't, if the person himself or herself doesn't invent it, it's not going to go very far in them. It's a wonderful thing. It was a wonderful lesson for me. It almost drove me out of business, but I learned hard.
You had a wonderful story you shared with me about an NIH situation involving one of the automakers. Would you share that with us?
Sure. This is a division of a large automobile company that will be nameless. They were making a lot of the decorative stuff that went into a car, and that was decreasing, and they were pretty scared. And they hired us, and the manager, or the president, the head of it anyway, and his right-hand engineer came to visit us, and we took them through what we usually did as a wishing session. What do you wish you... They told us originally they could market anything. It didn't really matter what we invented for them. We quickly found that that was not absolutely true. We'd say, well, suppose we did this, and they'd say, well, anything but that. And we did this 2 or 3 times, and I don't know whether you know the story about Winnie the Pooh. When Tigger came on the scene, he told that he liked anything to eat, and they gave him honey, and he said, well, anything but honey. And it worked on down until they found out what Tigger really wanted to eat. Well, we did that with these 2 guys, and they told us that one of the things they would really love to have is did I tell you what the technical thing was? Did
yes.
I bother? A constant speed mechanism, a mechanism that would translate the varying speed of the engine into a constant speed for the air conditioner, so that they could run it at a low speed and not wear it out so fast. And they would supply all the air conditioning units to General Motors. And we, by God, did it. We got a constant speed device, and we had it rigged up on a drill press, and it did what it was supposed to. So they came and they looked at it and said, wow, it does what it's supposed to. And
may I interrupt here just a second? Did you all hear what I heard? They not only came up with the idea, they built it. They actually built it.
That was our practice.
That was very interesting to me, and I didn't know that about him originally, that not only did they come up with the ideas, they were actually able to mechanize them.
I'd like to be cautious about that, but sometimes we were able to. We always we always built something that looked like it was going to work. They call that proving the principle.
Good.
And this one actually did work. It probably wouldn't have worked on a car engine, but it worked on a drill press. But it showed what could be done. And these guys looked at it and they said, boy, that looks good. We better get our engineers here. So they got their engineers. The engineers looked it over and said, yeah, it looks like it's doing what it's supposed to. We'd like an outside engineer to tell us that. So that we hired ADL, and they came over and said, yeah, it's doing what they say it's doing. So we packed it up and sent it to them. And I don't know, a month or so later, I called to find out what was going on, and they said, well, I don't know, we haven't gotten much further. And I said, well, what if you could have anything you wanted, what would you have? Would you want your money back? Do you want us to do the further development? What do you want? And he said, well, let me talk with my fellow here. And they talked for a while, and then he said, we'd like our money back. So I said, okay, I think I can get a buyer for it. And I called somebody I knew in Detroit. He said, hey, yeah, I'll take it. So I called him back and told him that to get in touch with this guy who was going to buy it. Nothing happened. And, excuse me, when I called finally to find out what had happened, he said, well, we've decided to keep it. And what happened is, I'm sure he imaged, I sell it to this guy, and they begin to make them, and they sell them to my company, and they say, where did these come from? And it's going to come back that I turned it down. So they put it on the shelf, and there it stands now. But it was one of the ways we learned about NIH.
As a consultant and trainer, and having done it successfully and built a company and fluctuated with the change that we all talk about, what would you advise future consultants to pay attention to in this field?
Money. I don't know that any of us start out with enough money. We certainly didn't. And it's a terrible pain, but it's a great motivator to want to eat. Actually, I think what has made us different from a lot of companies is that we paid attention to what people were telling us about us. And we were lucky to have people who would tell us when we were doing things wrong. And we really listened and changed. As much as anything in the two things that really helped us were we kept watching ourselves on videotape. And we kept interviewing people to say, what's going on? Why are you doing that? How are you feeling? That kind of thing. So I guess that's my best answer.
Thank you, George.
You're welcome.